For years and years, I struggled trying to write songs in a bunch of different ways, but eventually I finally landed on one simple songwriting formula that changed everything for me. Let's talk about it. Step one of this songwriting formula is to come up with a musical hook. This musical hook is something that will get us excited to write the rest of the song because the musical hook is already something fairly interesting, whether it be a memorable piano riff, a really catchy bass line, a really epic guitar riff, or whatever it might be. Why start with this? Well, we can have the foundation of our song be very vanilla and cookie cutter or not that interesting, as it very often is when we start with a chord progression, or we could build our song off of a foundation that is already pretty great and exciting. And if we start with a musical hook that really resonates with us, this is a much better starting place than, say, a cookie cutter chord progression. But I'll ask you the question, would you like to start your song with a foundation that's boring, or start your song with a foundation that is inspiring? And you also may have noticed this means that I am writing the music first, and you may be wondering, well, why? And essentially, I think it is much easier to listen to music and figure out what story the music is telling than it is to look at lyrics and derive what you think that song would sound like. As a simple exercise, you could look up an instrumental song and look up a poem. Which is easier? Is it easier for you when listening to an instrumental song to figure out what you think the story is that is being told, what that song would be about? Or is it easier when you read the poem to hear a sound of music in your head based off of the poem you're reading? Whichever one is easier for you is probably the order that you should do. If you think it's easier to hear sound based on lyrics, then, well, you probably should write lyrics first. If you, like me, think it's much easier to figure out a story based on a song you're hearing, then you should also probably start with music first. And another reason I tend to start with a musical hook first is what I call the songwriting funnel principle. If you picture a funnel, it's wide at the top and narrow at the bottom. And essentially, as we write our song, we get less and less creative room. At first, we could do anything. It could be in any key, it could be at any tempo, you can use any chords. There are no limits at all. But as we start to write our song, we're going to get more and more limited. Just as an easy illustration, if I were to tell you, hey, sit with a guitar and come up with a riff, you probably could do that way more easily than if I sent you an entire track of a song and said, hey, I know there's already a bass line, there's already chord progressions, there's already a piano, but figure out a great guitar riff to go with this song. Probably it's going to be easier to be more creative with the guitar riff when you just have unlimited options rather than already being really limited in what you can do by the chord progressions and what the piano's doing and what everything else is doing. So, if we want to have a part be particularly memorable, the best time to write it is early on in the process, before there are too many other instruments, chord progressions, etc. that are influencing what needs to happen with the song. And before you say this in the comments, yes, of course, sometimes limitations can be helpful. I'm not saying that you should always write the bass line first if you want the bass line to be amazing, but it is going to be way easier to write a killer bass line if you write it first than if you wait till the end of the song. Not always the case, but usually is going to be the case. So if you want a great bass line, write that first. If you want a great piano riff, write that first. If you instead want a really awesome guitar hook, write that first. And that leads us to step 2, which is writing the melody. And why this is essentially very simple, because melody is king, and this is the earliest we can write it in order to have a great instrument hook and a great melody. Essentially, I just think it's a lot easier to have both a great instrument hook and a great melody if we actually write a hook first and then the melody than the other way around. If you write a vocal melody first and then try to come up with a really great guitar riff to go with it or piano riff, that tends to be a lot harder to me than it is to listen back to your piano riff or your guitar riff or your bass line and come up with an interesting melody. So although I think the hook should be first because you can still write a great melody with a hook, it's just much easier to have both a great hook and a great melody when we go in the order of hook, melody, but we still don't want to wait too long to write our melody because, again, melody is king. So that's why melody is step number 2. So at this point, I have a musical hook and a melody to go with it. that probably means that really I have a hook and a melody for one song section, very often the verse, but sometimes the chorus. And that means step 3 is to further develop the music. Specifically, I want to make sure that I have at least the music of the verse and the chorus before I figure out what this song is about. So why do I want to have the verse and chorus music written before I get into lyrics at all? Essentially, it's because this essentially defines the arc of a song. Usually the verse is sort of the low point of the song and the chorus is the high point of the song. So that defines the arc. Whether the bridge ends up being a more exciting bridge or a less exciting bridge, whether we have a pre-chorus or not, or a post-chorus or not, that doesn't really affect the overall arc of the song. Sure, those are details along the way, and certainly it matters, but at a bare minimum, I like to have at least the verse music and the chorus music before I figure out what the lyrics are going to be all about. For instance, if your verses sound very low-key and sad, maybe even devastated, and then your chorus sounds sort of big and triumphant, well, that might mean that the arc of your song is demanding that it's about overcoming something, which will then affect what we will talk about when it comes to lyrics. And that, of course, leads us to step number 4, which I like to call lyric development. Essentially, this is starting with the most important question we can ask when starting with our lyrics, which is essentially, what does this song sound like it would be about? Why does this matter? Well, see if you can spot the difference between me saying, hey, I'm casting somebody for this role in a movie and I want to find the best actor for that specific role, versus I'm going to cast Robert Downey Jr. as the main character in my next movie. In the first one, we are fitting the right actor to the right role. We are not trying to shoehorn in a very specific actor. Instead, we are trying to figure out what actor is going to fit with the role best, because that's going to end up with the best results. In the second option, we're really just brute forcing Robert Downey Jr. whether he's right for the role or not. And we don't want to do that with our songs, where we are essentially saying, oh yeah, even though the music sounds like it should be about X or Y, I'm going to make it about A. Instead, we should listen deeply to our own music and really figure out, what does it sound like it would be like? Something I like to do very often is actually imagine that somebody else wrote the music and I'm trying to figure out what it actually is about. This may seem like a minor twist, and it is, but this can be helpful with figuring out what a song should be about, because then we are sort of pretending it already is about something. We are just discovering what that actually is. And then after figuring out at a high level what our song sounds like it would be about, we want to flesh it out. I do this by grabbing a bunch of images. Usually I'll just go to Google Images and look up art that is related to this central theme or idea of the song. I'll do some prose writing. I'll do some outlining of different ways that we could sort of develop out the story in the song sections. Verse 1 is about X, verse 2 is about Y, and then in the bridge we cover Z, and then the main theme is going to be in the chorus, etc., etc. As a general guideline, I try to have at least one full page of normal prose writing before I try to write a single lyric. Very often, just by doing prose writing, it sort of unlocks my brain and I write because I'm not too worried about, oh, but it's gonna fit the meter and I have to make sure that it's said just right. It removes all of those pressures and just allows me to write and get the creativity out without thinking about rhyming and meter and all the other things we're going to be worried about when we are writing lyrics. And also, when you write just a page of straight up prose, you might be surprised how many great lines you actually get out of that you can either rework into a line in your lyrics, or maybe sometimes it doesn't need rework at all. And that leads us to our final step, step 5, which is the lyric writing process. What's really important here is that we don't lose focus on both the big picture and the small picture. For the big picture, we need to make sure that all our lyrics are coming together and tell one cohesive story. For the small picture, it's really important to have efficient lyrics that communicate as much as possible with as few words as possible, because realistically, we're not going to have any more than, I don't know, maybe 250 words in most songs. So we need to make sure that we are ruthlessly efficient in our communication, because we only have so many words to communicate what our song is about. And in general, with this lyric writing process, we want to write, then rewrite, and then edit. And rewriting may happen many different times. Very often I will write 20 different versions of the first verse, the second verse, the chorus, before I arrive at one that I think can then be edited into something that's actually good. Don't be afraid of rewriting. Don't be afraid of writing much, much, much more than you will end up with. In fact, I think we're trained into really a bad mindset with school, where very often for papers, if your paper needs to be 3 pages, your rough draft is 3 pages, and then you sort of just edit it. Or if your essay needs to be 10 pages, you write 8 pages and then sort of expand it to 10 pages in the editing process. But when it comes to songwriting, instead we should probably be on the opposite end of the spectrum, where we are writing like 10 pages of lyrics to end up with 1 page of lyrics, where we just write a ton and then we whittle it down to the best of each song section. This can be really helpful for essentially avoiding the pitfall of trying to polish a turd, where we have a second verse that just isn't working and is not going to work because it's fundamentally broken, but we keep trying to edit the lyrics or shift some words around to try to get it to work. But no, it might actually be fundamentally broken and we need to totally rewrite it. A great way to avoid that problem is to get in the practice of rewriting until you have a song section that is fitting the big picture that it needs to and the small picture that it needs to. Or maybe more specifically, we want to make sure that we have written song sections that fit into the big picture, and then we work on the small picture where we're worried about individual words and lyrical efficiency. But make sure that your final draft, if you want to see it that way, is something where all the lyrics cohesively make a whole. The big picture is set, your storyline is there, it's clear, it's good, and now we just want to make the lyrics better at a more small, granular level. And if you want more on the lyric development and lyric writing process, be sure to check out my free 6-step lyric writing checklist. It will take you from an idea all the way to lyrics you are proud of with 6 simple, easy to understand steps. Doesn't mean they'll be short, doesn't mean that lyric writing will take 5 seconds. Certainly lyric writing, I think when done right, takes a pretty good amount of time, but you will end up with results that you are absolutely thrilled with. Be sure to check it out, songwritertheater.com/lyric checklist. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll talk to you in the next one.